for having me. So I'm Kasia. I'm going to kind of summarize 3 ways to integrate AI into your daily data science workflows, some things I've done, some limitations and practicalities I've dealt with because of the companies I've worked at. So about me, I have about 10 years of data science experience. I've used Perplexity to write this short bio for me. I reused it from a different talk that was on a different subject. I just told it like, hey, change it like I'm talking about AI. So I do a lot of applying AI work at companies, most recently like Block, where there's been a huge emphasis on us using AI in our day-to-day work all the time. This also comes with a certain privilege that I will probably call out in a little bit, is that I've been burning through tokens like there is no tomorrow. And I figured until I get in trouble, I can keep on doing that. So why AI? I'm going to say, well, there's no escaping it. I think 6 months ago, maybe a year ago, we talked about like, why is it beneficial, blah, blah, blah. Don't think it's worth having a conversation right now. Like, you have to use it. Your company will make you use it. There is no escaping that. The first, like the kind of classic thing of like analyzing text data, right? Like that's a really great use case. I've done it on a few occasions. I've done it in like a Databricks notebook. I pulled an OpenAI API key. It was fun. It was a little technical. And then very recently, I discovered that Snowflake Cortex AI in the Snowflake UI allows you to actually write a prompt within a SQL query. Made it a lot easier. It also allowed me to use things like PII, which I had to be really careful with how I handle and do some extra analysis. So the first analysis I've done is I look at some of the CS tickets, some of our customer complaints and what they are asking us about, what issues they have. My stakeholders have been asking me to do that for a while. They wanted to know which ones are kind of leading to churn. We had very high level subject headings from our CS team. So we really wanted to go a level deeper, figure out, okay, what it is that people actually struggle with, what product changes we should make, what's the sentiment there, and then tie that back to churn. So I feel like that's actually a pretty fairly classic example. I feel like one of the first text projects anyone has done is looking at customer complaints, because that's a very text-rich data that's hard to parse through. Second thing I did is I looked at address data. So I've worked with an identity verification. Had to be really careful with all of that data. A lot of red tape around that. But some of the things I wanted to do is Square has this concept of like a merchant and a unit. Usually units to us would mean a different location. I wanted to verify how true that is. So while it is pretty simple to just compare cities, zip codes, those kind of things in SQL or Python, it's much harder to compare that first line of address. That's a lot more prone to have typos. People can put street versus ST versus ST period. They can have typos and just be off by one character. And specifying that fuzzy matching in all sorts of addresses that can happen can be difficult. So I spent some time looking at the data. I then used ChatGPT to help me write the prompt. I give it examples of what I wanted to count as the same location versus what I wanted to count as different locations. So, hey, like if it's the same street number, but 2 different suite numbers, separate location. If it doesn't have a suite, the same location, all of that. And I compared that approach to just writing some regex in SQL. And I've noticed about 20% of increase in similarities between the addresses. So, and a lot of them I went through for fun to see like, is this accurate? And it did increase that accuracy. I also told it to give me confidence score of, hey, how confident are you in this output of, is this the same location or not? That was actually surprisingly good. And then the third one I did is I looked at UI confusion. So passive dropdown, we have another option. People kind of put in whatever they want in that box. And I mapped that out to like the existing dropdown options, figured out where the confusion was coming from, figure out that some people would just put garbage no matter what. And why? Because again, I was working with an IDD. I did not get sign off to put those things in production. At least I was able to inform some UI decisions. So from one side, it was a bit of a bummer that it didn't go into prod. From the other side, it informed some UI decision. Now, this one, speeding up your workflow. So again, I worked at a company that had its own agent built on top of the other LLMs called Goose. It's open source. You can go and use it. There was a big emphasis on us using Goose. So a lot of my workflow focus on that. We built a ton of MCPs on top of that. I had an MCP for Snowflake. I had one for Google Docs. There was one for Linear. There was one for pretty much any tool you can imagine. So that's what I used. So I was able to write the queries within the UI. I was able to tweak the queries. It would run the queries for me. I would ask it to, hey, like, look at this data source, look at this other thing, give me the output. Here's the questions I want to answer. I would say that 8 times out of 10, it was pretty accurate. The other 2 times, it hallucinated something whack happened. We also built what Data MCP, which would have some of our core metrics in it, so that if my product managers come and ask me, hey, how many active users we've had in the past 6 months, I could send them here and they can go and self-serve. Again, 8 times out of 10, it would be somewhat accurate. I have automated some Slack responses. Maybe I'm lucky. I've worked at a company that's been very documentation heavy. So was recently I checked, it was almost 50 pages long document. We called it How to Data, and it documented all of the data for my team, all of the dashboards, all of the prior analysis. It linked out to all the ETL documentation, anything, metrics definitions, all of that. I fed it into another internal tool, and then whenever someone would hit up our Slack channel and ask a question and ask for a query, it would pull whatever was in that document. I could then feed it more information if it wasn't complete, but it also allowed me to reduce the amount of time I'm spending answering questions and taking away from my work. I also reversed it, so I used it for documentation. I would, for example, plug in the source code for an ETL. I have an ETL design doc template, actually on Square's blog, and I'll tell it like, hey, reverse engineer this documentation. Tell me what columns there are, how to use it, give me some sample queries. It would have probably produced 80% of the documentation accurately for me. There were a few tweaks I would need to make or some context that it wouldn't have, but made the documentation a lot faster and easier, less annoying. I think my favorite things have been like code tweaks and updates. Pretty annoying work having to like scan your ETL for like column references for a particular table. I was most recently working with some engineers on migrating from one platform to another. So I had to deprecate some of the source tables. I had to change the references. If I had an ETL with 150 lines of code, I didn't have to do it manually. I would just tell, I did it with the Goose AI, and I would tell it, hey, like replace references from this table to this table, find the columns that are not matching, QA it, check the number of rows, check that the data exists, make sure you run it, all of that. Another thing I've done is I asked engineers to document new logging for me, and I would then grab that and put it into Goose and tell it to create a first draft of a new ETL for me. Been particularly handy using customer data platform. Obviously, there is other tools that I've been constantly trying to discover. We've been having AI Tuesdays where we've been encouraged to discover new tools, work on something new. Obviously, I haven't touched or anything like Cursor here, but I've been spending some time with them. Another thing, pretty classic, communication and writing. That's been really helpful using ChatGPT, Perplexity. I could input like the tone I want. Sometimes if someone would say something questionable at work and I would write an angry message, I would then put it into ChatGPT and tell it like, hey, do not sound angry, like make this sound professional.
Strip the passive aggression.
Yes. I'm warm and assertive. I also built a custom GPT with like our career ladder and like the next level up, and I would tell it like, hey, think like a data scientist from the next level up. So some things like that. And then obviously I've been doing some personal projects, which I feel like we all have been doing. My most recent one is I vibe coded like a little lovable website with like probability and statistics questions for interview revision. So yeah, essentially constantly trying to use these things, but also thinking about, hey, is this taking less time with AI, or is this more consuming because I need to do some extra checks, or I don't have the right documentation, or I'm just forcing it when really it would be much faster if I just edit those 2 lines of code myself. Okay, my third one has been like learning and rubber ducking. So one thing I've had a lot of fun with is like figuring out like best approach or statistical method. Or I would have a project and I would think like, hey, this is the method I want to use. And then I would talk to, say, ChatGPT and help me think through it, or tell like, hey, like I have this analysis. I want to make this more technical. What other approaches should I consider? So that's been really fun. It's been good for my learning. I've then had it give me some code prototypes, obviously troubleshooting code with all of the copilots that are everywhere, whether they're in Snowflake, Databricks, all of that. Sometimes when they don't work, I would put this back into ChatGPT or Goose and try any of the other models to figure out what's going on and why it's not working. Sometimes it's embarrassing, but it just finds a typo that way. So I probably could have found it myself. So yeah, those are kind of 3 of the use cases. Some things to consider. So I have toolkit availability out there just because most recently I've worked at a big company that has had some red tape around AI usage, what tools we're allowed to use, how we're allowed to use them, all of that. Obviously, that means you need to be mindful of sharing company data or personal data with any unapproved tools or tools you don't fully trust. And the other thing is like managing some of these tools can be time consuming. There was definitely weeks when I found myself spending more time trying to figure out why my cursor connection is not working instead of like doing the actual work. So I always want to put that as a caveat that you don't want to get bogged down with that. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
Key question. I guess I'll start with an anecdote first. When you said that you use it for communication, that reminded me of a message I wanted to send to RevOps saying how dumb their idea was and that it would be architecturally impossible to do. And I use it as a communication tool to reframe it and be more diplomatic, actually. So that was funny. That reminded me of that. And then also I just wanted to ask you, because AI has sort of been this tool that we use throughout in data workflows we have, how much traditional machine learning do you still do, or data science, pure data science as opposed to using, agents and LLM prompting for some of the data science workloads you have?
I would say still a fair amount, but that's also because I enjoy doing that. And there are moments when I find myself over relying on these tools, and then I kind of double guess myself. I'm like, you know what, like let me manually go and like do this one thing or practice that. It's more about like how do I use AI to 10x myself or to prototype something faster or to think something. Apparently job interviewing, a lot of the time I'm sitting in perplexity, telling it, do not tell me the solution, or like, hey, here's like the level of hinting I want you to give me, but I need to get there myself. So kind of using it as a thought partner. I guess that's another use case I haven't mentioned. Like I've been doing like even behavioral interviews, just recording myself and telling it, hey, think like a step level data scientist, poke holes at my approach, tell me what I should be doing differently, ask follow-up questions, that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm sitting in my office and talking on my laptop a lot too.
I wish I'd asked this for all the speakers. There seems to be, at least in my company and other people I know, a request to get more natural language access to data. And we've seen that that's not always realistic to do. I'm curious, given all the experimenting you've been doing and playing around with that, how do you manage expectations for people who don't maybe understand what it is you're doing, and maybe it isn't appropriate to start with natural language work with big data sets?
I think I just generally try to do a lot of education. I've been lucky on my most recent team. I've actually had pretty technical stakeholders, even on like the PM side. I've had a lot of stakeholder trust. But yeah, essentially during education, sometimes I would have to sit down with someone and like literally show them examples on like why something doesn't work, or like really explain to them the whole process on a granular level. But I think personally, I've been really lucky in that respect most recently.
I didn't talk about Asphill's current role, not a problem. But I've seen it as set in terms of what is their motivation, how to communicate in the way that they need to be moved, because they don't care about that 90% of the time. If you're talking to a non-technical stakeholder. So, and you find that they care about and be like, this is what's be useful to you, even if